Next up is Art Ostro, Spring Athletic Summary.
All right, well, there's a couple of sheets that I gave you, just kind of going in order. The first sheet is a memo, which is basically the same as the last two seasons. Just talks about what are the sports that we offer, what are conference sports, what are non-conference sports, and then I gave a box of, just for this spring, what our participation numbers will be. And as we go along, you're going to see that we actually increased our number of athletes that came out. However, it looks quite a bit different with the number of athletes that are doing one sport to two sport to three sport, and that could have an impact on Mr. Passerello's numbers with the activities that this year maybe some of them chose athletics, and didn't do something else. But so on that first page, you can see in the box we were at 29.4% overall of the student population that participated in a spring sport. That equates to 425 athletes this spring, which is up almost 20 from last year, just shy. And actually more than when we charged nothing in 2010, 2011. I don't have it on there, but the overall percentage of students participating in athletics for the entire year, this year we're at 49.7%. Last year was 47.5%, and 2010, 2011 was 49.1%. So we are, we're up 0.6% from 3 years ago. And then just an explanation of the pay to participate numbers of why, we haven't collected, well, we might have up to this point, but when I ran this report, as John was talking about before, it was on the R drive. I think it was May 5th is when I got the numbers, so they're probably a little more updated now on there. But why the numbers won't be divisible by 100, just because some of our families have payment plans set up where they're not paying 100, at the beginning and then 100 halfway. Any questions on that first sheet? Okay, our second sheet is the athletic summary. I won't go in great detail because a lot of our athletes were recognized tonight, are all conference, but just to give a brief review of our season this year. Our badminton team, our varsity was 3-6 overall. JV was 5-5. Freshmen were 1-11. This was actually, we did not have a full freshman level last year, so we had enough girls come out. We actually had to make cuts in badminton this year. And hopefully moving forward, we will have a full freshman schedule like we did this year. Baseball is currently now 32-4-1. They won the regional this past Saturday. That's the best record in the school history. The previous best record was 30-7 in, I believe, 1998 or 97. So hopefully they can continue and to make some history here. Our sophomores were 15-7-1 overall, 12-5 in conference. Freshmen were 11-10, and 5-4. Unfortunately, with the weather this spring, we did not get in full schedules. Typically, we try to get up to 35 games, but the weather did not help us this year. Girls soccer varsity was 8-2 overall, 5-1 in the conference, second place in our conference. We lost in the regional championship game to Wheaton St. Francis, 2-0. Our junior varsity was 3-8-4 overall, 2-2-2 in conference. Freshmen were 6-3 overall. We do not have freshman level for conference currently. We will moving forward. Softball ended up 11-21. We lost to Nazareth in the regional final, third place in conference. JV was 13-8, 6-3 in conference. Freshmen were 5-12 overall, 1-4 in conference. There's only two other schools that have freshman level for softball. Boys tennis varsity was 1-8 overall, 1-4 in the conference. Frost soft was 2-7 overall and 2-3 in the conference. Our girls track took 6th at conference. JV took 5th. We recognize our all-conference in state. Our boys track team took first in conference this year. We recognize the qualifiers for the state. We did take 21st in our 4x2 at the state meet, 25th for the 4x4. David Swan took 21st for the long jump, and Lewis Rogers took 12th in state for the 300 hurdles. Frost soft took first at the Marmy Academy and third place in MSC, and they were our all-conference. Boys volleyball finished 25-12 I don't have it on there. We lost in the second game of the regionals to Neuqua Valley. Girls water polo varsity was 13-18 overall. They lost to LT in the first game of the region or the sectional. Junior varsity was 10-7-1 overall. Our boys water polo was 6-18. They lost to which was the state champs, Fenwick, in the second game of the sectional. The JV was 14-3. Questions on the recap?
I have a question.
Yes.
I tried to ask this, not disparaging, because that's not my intent, but how do you weigh within the different sports where, some sports the kids, like badminton and water polo, a lot of them probably never even play till they come to high school, so you're developing them. Other sports, we've had long histories where we've had, good teams are not as good or whatever, where, you determine whether the expectation of where you would expect our record to be. We talk about how the boys baseball team had their best record ever, but some of the other sports we've actually seemed like they were not as high quality of what in some of them maybe for a long period of time. So how do you evaluate that, and whether it's a coaching issue or a participation issue, or what do you just
The
think of doing
combination of
something?
all. I mean, we meet with the coaches, talk to the coaches at the end of the season, talk about, was it the sense of the people coming through that we just weren't as talented this year? If we have, in certain situations, we're trying to start a feeder program to try to increase the overall, competitiveness of our teams. But you kind of look at it a yearly basis, and is it a coaching issue, or is it a talent issue? Is it a lack of a feeder program issue? So we kind of look at all of those to try to get a gauge of, but yeah, we kind of look and try to see where we should be every year, and then, what was the factors that led to whether it be a disappointing year or a very successful year.
And the reason I asked, really, before I even saw this report, you think of a sport like wrestling, but I think from what I heard, we have two pretty good coaches who both chose for personal reasons to not coach next year, but at least on paper, the coach that you were able to pick up this year has a pretty good resume coming from Oak Park River Forest. So I'm just trying to see how you do it versus, well, there's an opening and we've been able to get somebody good, but do we look at, well, maybe sometimes you have to think about whether we should just look for another coach anyway, whether the coach is ready to step down or not.
Oh, yeah, no,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah, we had a discussion last week about.
And I'm not
about
saying
that.
you should do
Yeah.
with anybody,
Right.
because I don't weigh the factors, I'm just
Right.
curious about it,
Yeah.
that's all. Okay.
I also think, we've talked about, even at the board level, the size of an athletic program for a smaller school, and that you don't have a really large teams, deep teams. You know what I'm saying, is that our kids are spread thinner, and our kids are very active and very involved, and so I think that is always a challenge at a smaller school that's trying to run a lot of programs, because kids have interest in all of those programs. So I think that
Thank you.
might be part of it too.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, a lot has been asked about the pay to participate. Do you want to go to that?
We can go to that, and kind of a combo of the last two sheets. I'll skip to page 3. So we had met and wanted to come up with a couple different proposals.
Well, wait, page 2 is the...
Oh, I'm sorry, you want to go page 2? Yeah.
Well, I just want them to see the summary.
Page 2, you'll see, like, our numbers, like I talked about before, have gone up slightly this year. Last year in the spring, we actually did a really good job tracking the WAVE students. We did go up in numbers, and our WAVE students went up this year a little bit, but as far as collecting of the money, it was pretty much accounted for the spring as of May 5th, but we knew exactly who still had money out there. So as of the spring, the revenue was $66,386. But I know there was still a little more to collect. If you shoot to the next page, you'll see on
Can I ask
that
a
top.
question about
Yeah.
that? Are you on- Oh, I'm sorry, you're on the wrong. I'm sorry.
So on the next page where on top, the athletic participation numbers from 2010 to 2013. So we had a total of 720 athletes this year, which is 10 more than when we charged 0. But if you look, what changed was we went, in 2010, 2011, we had 373 athletes do one sport. This year, we had 431 just do one sport. So quite a bit of increase there in just the number of athletes that just chose to do one. And you can see that our two-sport athletes went down from last year by 12. When we didn't charge anything, it went down more than that. And our three-sport athletes, you can see, went down by 20 from last year, and 37 or 35 from the year before that. So total athletes are up. However, athletic names or participation spots, as we look at it, have gone down. We're at 1,041 actual names on rosters for the entire year, where last year we were 1,072, and the year before that we were at 1,114. So our overall participation went up, but more kids chose to do one sports than two or three sports, so our names on rosters for the whole year actually went down.
So the kids that are in the 257 for two sports, I think this would be part of something the board would want, just to make sure they understand. If you're in the 257, you're not counted in the 431?
Correct.
You're counted as so those are kids that have played two sports. So really, that's 514 participation
Right, that's in
spots.
the next column over, yep.
And then if you're a three-sport athlete, you're not counted in either one or two. You're counted, and then that's why it's 96 participation
96
spots
spots.
on the right.
So that, as of May 5th, when I got these numbers, we had collected $181,000 from pay to participate, which, if everybody paid, it would have been $208,200, so that's about 13% that have been waived this year. So what I did on the bottom,
You did that on dollars, right?
yeah,
Not participants.
I did it
Does
on,
work the same?
it worked, yeah, so 720 times 200,
Okay.
or off of the, yeah. So on the left-hand side is, we did three different proposals based off of this year's numbers. So the first number one would be the first sport is 200, the second sport is 50, the third sport would be 0. So what I tried, we just used the exact same numbers this year. If we did 13% waived, we generate $130,000, so we'd be down about $50,000. The second plan was 200, 100, and 0. With the 13% waived, we'd be at 142. And the last one was 200 for the first sport, 100 for the second sport, 50 for the third, and we'd be at 151 if the numbers were the exact same. The column on the right, the three boxes on the right, I tried to project just based off the last 3 years of how they might fluctuate. So at column number one, we might have 400 athletes that come out, then 270 for a second sport, then 70 for a third sport. So as I went down, I just decreased those 2 and 3 sport athletes when we changed the amount that we would charge. It is definitely a projection, and based on the numbers, I think we are pretty much where we would be at for total number of athletes. We might go up a little bit, and that's I have in that first projected one, 740 athletes, which would be 20 more than this year. But I think we have at least showed a pattern that we're right around 700 for the last 3 years. I would think that would probably hold true. But it could change with activities, so there's a lot of kind of factors in there, but I tried to at least project something using the last 3 years of data to come up with a dollar amount that we would possibly bring in if we made the changes.
So the board needs to look at is, do we need to tear the pay to participate? That's been a request of the discussion the last 2 times athletics have come up, both in the fall and in after the winter season, and Art presented, and I said let's wait till we get through the season, through all 3 seasons in our second year of pay to participate, so that we can see how it impacted participation. So our biggest drop off was 12 students in 2 sports and 20 students in the 3 sport. It didn't really have much of an impact on the 1 sport athletes. So I would definitely recommend that you keep first sport 200. The thing I want to remind the board of is one of the reasons we put the $200 into place is last year this Ms. Bylsma, Mr. Ostro, and myself and Tim McGinnis went through a couple different scenarios when we were looking at budget, and we talked about the possibility of cutting a few sports. And we received a pretty good outcry from the public to not cut any sports and to consider different pay-to-participate methods. And we even had some of the parents that tried to privately fund the math club and the musical offsite, schedule meetings both with me and Pam, and come to the board meeting saying they would rather do a pay-to-participate than privately fund. And so that's kind of how we got to where we are today. So as we look at this model, what I want to make sure we're looking long-term is that if we do a tier model, which I'm in support of from an educationalist perspective, because I'm hoping that would help increase participation. But I also don't want to be sitting back with this board 8 to 10 months from now saying, well, we have to look at cutting sports again, or then we're going to be back to raising it to 200. So we need to decide. I know we have a goal that the board approved that would be getting every single student involved in at least one thing. And hopefully that by maybe lowering some of the pay to participate or the multiple pay to participate, that might help. But I just ask that we think about everything tonight when we discuss it, and in June when we discuss it.
Currently, we have no tier, right?
Currently, we have no tier, $200 for everything, and that's what generated the $181,000.
And you're advocating that there's a major fall-off on the two-sport athlete?
No, I'm just citing the facts,
Just 12
the numbers,
students?
12 and 20, so 32.
Again, without knowing the sports, not knowing where they're at, it's difficult to say. 12 drop off of a base of 270 or 300 is not, to me, not a big drop. I can see the three-sport, but again, not knowing what the sport is. Is it cross-country? You know, I
Right.
don't know the sport.
Are you able to pull those sports?
We could, you'd have to pull each individual kid and look and see exactly where.
So you'd have to look at the 720 and see how many participated.
Yeah, I mean, we could, if you look at the last three, the one I did in the fall and the winter, we would see the decrease in what sports those were.
Right, I mean, but
some were
What
off.
what I also recognize is that there's an athlete in one of the major sports, typically is probably an athlete in another major. For example, basketball player playing baseball, or a football player moving over to track.
Right.
So, I mean, part of it is also to stay in shape. So, I mean, I can understand, but they're also used to, those athletes are the type who are used to their lives having to pay. For example, our feeder program for soccer is not a cheap program. So, and those students and parents are used to paying monies,
Right.
so.
I just want to go back to, that was part of my speech, like,
Okay.
we got to 200 because we didn't want to cut sports.
So we should
the
assess.
board members were asking, well, is this really hurting our numbers by having 200, 200, 200? Here are the numbers.
So we need to assess the sports that dropped off.
There was some, I think John suggested of also considering whether we should have a limit for a family on how much they have to pay. Maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, John, but I thought.
No, I think that should be, we should consider that. You had
There's
a number in mind?
Oh, sorry, you had asked before, and I didn't have it on the sheet, but there's so many different plans out there from different schools, but just from our conference, Fenton does $50 a sport, but they cap it at $100. Immaculate Conception is just a Ileana Christian is just a $30 fee. Glenbard South is $130 per sport, no cap. Ridgewood and Elmwood Park is $65 per sport, and the third is free. But when we did this last year, there's just tons of different, whether it's a family plan or the third sport free or whatever, there's just tons of different ways to do it.
And I'll be honest with you, when I directed the administration to come up with some plans and then we reviewed before what was presented to you tonight, it's more or less just, okay, 200, 150, 200, 100, nothing. And showing you the specific numbers. You could have did any combination of numbers here tonight to get to the different thing. I think the biggest question the board needs to ask is what are they willing to sacrifice in revenue to try to increase participation? And in this, where I put on the educator hat and not the superintendent hat, where I'm thinking of finances and everything, when you put on the educator hat from the principal's perspective or the athletic director's perspective, you'd like to have nothing charged because you'd like to have every kid participate in whatever they want and run everything. And we realize schools can't operate like that anymore.
But aren't we seeing an increase? Didn't we see an increase in one-sport athletes? So doesn't it say that we have an increase in the number of participants? It's just the number of those individuals who are taking 2 sports or 3 sports. But the overall number of one-sport athletes had actually increased. So that would say the participation had actually gone up.
Right now, remember when those 20 kids that didn't play a third sport, that really counts for 60 spots. Because you got to multiply that by 3. Those kids aren't counted in the one sport. So when it looks like it went down 20, if you look to the right on the participation numbers, it's really 60 participant drop off. Same with the 2-sport one is the one to me that seems like wasn't too significantly impacted. It really starts when you get into the 3-sport. Now you're talking 60 less kids. Or that 60 less participation spots, 20 students. Combination of 20 students.
So you want the board to come back in?
I just want the board to talk about it.
Yeah, why do you, I'm trying to understand that.
No, you're going roster names. So some of our sports have been affected, whether that's cross-country, track, or whatever sport you want. Our rosters before had more names because those kids that did 3 sports are on 3 different rosters. So yes, we had more athletes come out this year, single people. But what those athletes played, we are down. So in actual roster names, we are down, from 1,072 to 1,041, which was at 1,114 back in 2010. So some of our teams' rosters have shrunk because those kids are now just choosing to do one sport.
So that brings up your example of the basketball player that used to run cross-country to get in shape for basketball, now probably working out on his own instead of paying $200 as his second sport or her third sport. Just want to make sure everybody's clear on all that.
Well, Gary's question on the first sport implies that some individual sports have increased participation. It would have to be a no-cut sport. So what really, there's a lot of 378 to 431 participation spots.
Girls swimming went up by 20.
Okay.
Girls water polo went up by about 15. And then you'd have to look at a few other I don't know.
So those are the
were
big ones then.
Gymnastics
Badminton,
might
you
have.
just
Oh,
said
badminton
enough
went up.
for-
We had to make cuts. So.
You said boys water polo went up?
Boys water polo, they went up by 2.
So it's girls swimming and girls water polo and badminton?
According to your numbers, badminton went down by 5.
Oh, maybe they make.
It went from
Yeah,
32
so that
to
went down.
43 and back
I'd
down
have to look at
38.
each. Girls track went from 36 to 40. Girls soccer went from 59 to 67. So that was an increase in 8. I'd have to look at each season to find exactly where it came from. But I do know girls swimming, we had a huge jump this year.
The overall, if you look at the board's participation goal, it's a slight step in the right direction because you had an increase so that students participating in at least one thing went up. So I don't think we would rush and make a decision on this tonight, but something we might want to think about is this is the first year we've done the 200, is something where you consider maybe it's 200 for the first 2 sports and there's nothing for the third, or you consider of not changing it but putting a family cap on, so that it's something to consider. I don't know exactly what's broken here to say to you tonight, like, hey, here's where I've identified a major
Well, two things that I agree. We look, the policy is participation, so if you looked at it that way, you'd look at one sport, you could maybe end a discussion, but the fact is, two things we've heard is, if you count the 60 or that way, you've got some good athletes who are not participating in sports that could help out and help the, older ones lead the younger ones. And the other thing is, the reason we wanted to have more participation is because all the studies say kids who participate are better students. And the corollary to that you read quite often is kids who are athletes or whatever. I don't know if it's true for other things Pam could say, but I've read it with athletes. They tend to do the best while they're in season. If they're in the fall sport, they tend to do better in the fall, and then in the spring when they got plenty of time on their hand, they never do their work. And that's my experience with my kids. So the other advantage of having a kid in 2 or 3 sports is they're going to, at least for half of, or a third, whatever it comes out to, half of each semester or something, they're going to be involved in a sport. So that part of the involvement might pay off in them doing better in their classwork and being more involved. So, and John really brought it up the most, but I think we should try. We know a couple sports dropped off. Cross country was an example. Kids have, the other thing is it's keeping them healthy. What the heck's better for a kid to do all fall or spring than to run with the cross country or track team, right? So, Gary has brought up some good points. If you picked a sport like basketball, hard for me to imagine a kid, we're having struggling getting kids to do that, but I presume except for freshmen, they're all cut sports for basketball, right?
Yeah, freshman's cut too.
Freshman's cut, so you only have a small number of spots, and, if some family's not, I'm not saying if some family's unwilling to pay, there's going to be 12 families that are willing to pay for somebody to be in basketball, where we know, what we're hearing anyway, that's not true necessarily for like track and cross country. So I think aside from the policy in this case, the advantage of having the kids involved more is good all around. And I think if we did, whether it's pay for 2 sports and get the third free, whether it's a family cap or something that is suggested, I still think we should consider that. But I support Kevin 100%. I wouldn't support cutting the payment if we were going to have a discussion next year about cutting a sport again or doing something else with the budget because we did it. I think that would be detrimental.
So my question to you is, given these 3 scenarios, compared to this year's revenue source, your drop in revenue, how are you going to make it up, or how do you expect to make that dollar amount?
Well, we don't know. I mean, we've talked that possibly by lowering this would increase the activity side, which would bring in more revenue. I looked at gate receipts. We really didn't, when we changed the policy with boosters, we actually made about $900 more this year. I mean, that's going to fluctuate on home events. So at this point, we really don't know. And that's the tough part, is that what else, if you come back and say we got to give something up, then
That was the point that I made back to the board when I first said that, is that what is the board willing to sacrifice? Because we're at a point where our supply budgets are down. We've cut them the last 2 years to get to that point last year, to where we're running a river run from the athletic department to try to help make up some of the supply budget. So there's not any other cuts that can be made to offset $50,000 if we decide to lower revenue by $50,000.
All right, so any other comments on this by the board?
Could you redo these numbers with the first and second staying the same and the third sport dropping? Do you have that in there? You didn't do a scenario where it's 200, 200, 0, did you?
we didn't do 200, 200, 0. No, we just
No.
did 200, 100. I mean, we're kind of plugging in numbers. We
Yeah,
plug
yeah.
in whatever number you kind of want and see where it would come out revenue-wise.
Do you want us to look at a cap also?
It's just hard to.
That'd be hard to calculate.
Yeah, I
That would
mean,
take
I
a
don't,
lot.
you're gonna have to come
You're
through
gonna
and
have to
say
make
you
it
have
yes.
X number of families, and, that's a totally different analysis, isn't
Right.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would.
I mean, what did we project initially as the waiver? That's like double than what we projected, right? We were looking at 7%, were we?
No, we're actually over
We thought
our,
it'd be 20%.
Was it 20?
we've
Is that what
We're
that
at
free lunch?
17% free lunch.
Okay, so 13% waiver.
what we projected for revenue for pay to participate, we actually went over it this year. I don't remember
The
how
thing
much.
where this, when you talk about a cap, though, is you have a lot of these kids who are not only are on athletics, and not as much on the pay to participate clubs. Some of our athletes that are good athletes also are on SA or class sponsors or stuff, but they're not, I don't think there's too many athletes that are on a sport as well as being in the musical.
It's a handful.
Handful, but I mean, that was my reasoning for a cap, is that maybe a kid now might not Well, the reason for bringing that up is when I go back to the family cap, is now the kid that plays in 2 or 3 sports and wants to be in the musical, that might be putting the parents over the edge. To where now not only did I pay $500 or $600 for sports, now I'm paying $100 for the musical. So that's why I was wondering, do we come up with a flat dollar amount that says, hey, listen, if you get the $600 for a family for just athletics or activities, that's a cap, or do you keep going?
Can we pull off total amounts for families paid for activities?
It'd be pretty,
That'd be
a
pretty
very
tough.
complicated analysis.
Yeah.
I don't know if Skyward can generate a report like that. Could be.
Just merge the 2 spreadsheets.
And
And
Gary's,
sort
and
by
Gary's
last
question
name.
about 200, 200, 100, how is in the second scenario, 200, 100, 0, how is the 77,000 computed? I can see above it, it's 431 times 200 is 86,000. How do you get how does the 77,000?
Because it's too,
It's, all right, which one are you looking at? I'm sorry, the one on the left?
Well, you have one,
middle box, second on the left.
257 times 3.
257 times 3. Because it's
Participation.
200 plus 100 for the second, so it's 300, that's in the parentheses, so 257 times 300 is a 77,
Because the second sport would only be 100.
but you still gotta pay the 200 for
The
the
200
first
for
one,
first.
so it's
That's why I
300.
did that.
Okay, any other questions for Art? Any other scenarios you want Art to look at? Art, if you want to look at what Gary's talking about now, maybe looking at a 200, 200, and 0.
We go with Kevin's point though, between Kevin and Pam, because, and Tim, take a look at whether you think it's be appropriate to have a family cap.
Yeah, we'll try to see if we can find
I don't know
something
if you,
to
I mean,
discuss
I don't
in
want you to
June.
spend 25 hours trying to do an
No.
analysis, because maybe you could do
All
some
right, so
mapping of rules.
let's look at this scenario, the scenarios you got there, plus a 200, 200, and 0, and then look at the family cap, what the
There's
effect is.
there's still another option. If I'm reading this right. And I'm sure I've mentioned this to Kevin before. Our total revenue for the clubs is what?
It's minimal,
Not much. It's like
16 and 5, or is that the total?
16,000.
16,000 total.
All right, so then, and the pay to play is 180?
Yeah, 180.
So it's roughly 200,000. One option to consider, and I think we should vote on it, is increase the fee if that's possible legally. When you come here, you pay 200,000 divided by 1,400 is, what's the math?
1,400 times 200? 1,400 students times a $200 fee, is that what?
No, I'm taking the total money we're making now is about $200,000.
It's
Divide
less than
that by,
$150.
divide that by 1,400 students.
So less than $150 a student.
Okay, so we charge every student $150 at registration as a participation fee. No collection, other than that, they join whatever the heck they want and pay nothing extra. That's certainly an option I think we should.
We'd have to check with legal on that, because there's this number of students that don't do anything that now you've hit with a 150 assessment. Remember, we already charge close to 200 flat registration fee, so now you'd be
Not
hitting
close
parents
to.
with 350.
Right, well, I mean, that if it's legal and we want to vote on it, we can vote on it. I mean, if you want, if our goal is participation, which I agree is a very good goal, we have to look at this option. I mean, I bet you.
I can ask, we'll look up two things. Can you assess a
look at it.
flat participation fee?
Would that increase participation in such a way as it would increase costs?
It'd definitely be an effect, but I mean, if we're just looking at.
Oh, sure. It's just
We're trying to match the revenue, and that's one way we can match the revenue. On the other hand, we'd probably increase participation.
Well, you know exactly what the revenue will be.
So, yeah, the revenue's set, and maybe we're getting more participation with the same revenue.
All right, so let's look at that and then see if we can legally do that.
And the other one was 200, 200, 0, right?
That's right, yeah.
I'm sure Gary already did that math.
He already did that, right? We know that.
$6,400 less than what you
Did.
this year.
Cross-subsidy issue.
Right, 32 times 200, right?
No fee.
Right.
Join.
Well, 32 would be, yeah.
It's like a book fee.
All right, any other questions for Art? Thank you, Art, then come back with that for the June meeting then.
Yeah, it would be 60
I'm gonna
times
jump around
200.
because Diane Morelli's been sitting here, and I think we got a break in the rain right now, so if we get her done real quick.
Did you want to talk about conference expansion at all? Or did I
There's
get-
a conference
That's why we're here.
expansion contract. I know
Right,
Mr.
Matt?
Cindy's, wants to, there's a,
All right, so let me do this, I'm gonna do visitors' comments right now,
Is Art coming back?
and then Diane will have a visitors' comments, and we can bring you back right away, all right?
Okay.
All right?